I'll do that.
Yeah.
Some people are in the waiting room. See, waiting room, admit everybody. Hi, hi, hi.
Oh my God, who was that with the hat?
What hat?
Something flashed on the screen that looked like someone had a big hat on.
Okay.
I think it was my aura.
It's the aura, yeah.
Hello, Alexander.
Hello, am I heard?
Hi.
Hi, I can't hear you.
You can't?
Oh, I can now.
Oh, good.
Amazing what pushing a button can do.
It looks so lovely there. Oh, can you push some through?
Yeah, it really is. It's really,
Really?
it is really lovely. It's beautiful here. I'll just give you another little spin.
Oh, the rhododendron. Yeah.
And you're on the Cape?
We are, yeah. This is in Orleans.
Oh, I love that town.
Yeah, yeah, it's really, you know, it's equidistant from the ocean and the bay, which is very nice. And you, Jack, you go to Truro, is that right?
Yes, we've been going there yearly for a long time, but I'm afraid this year we're not going.
Mm-hmm. Do you stay in the same place?
Well, the
Did you catch it, Jack?
I don't know. It was a little fruit fly. I don't know what it's doing up here. There's nothing to eat.
Well, I've got us recording. I'm having trouble turning the screen over to you, Jack, as co-host. I'm not sure I need to since...
No, I don't think so. We're not going to have any slides. I'm afraid all you're going to see is me looking at you and then looking down at my notes.
That's fabulous.
Love it.
So we're waiting for, I know that Betty said she wasn't coming because she was...
Right, I have to see what's going on with Shari because she said she couldn't get in. So let me send the invitation again. Diane entered. Hi, Diane, wherever you are.
Hi, Diane.
Hi, Dan.
Hello.
For the Museum of Bad Art, when I logged into Zoom for that, I had to upgrade Zoom before it would let me in. So I don't know if Shari's having that trouble now or not.
All right, let me send her the...
I had a problem getting in too.
Did you have to get the bad version of Zoom?
Well, I did.
It says you should, but you don't really have to until...
Yeah, I didn't do it even though it told me to.
Right. And
Well, I'm wondering if the reason why Barbara is having trouble...
Sorry, Barbara upgraded.
Yeah, so maybe we're not compatible.
I don't,
I think if we've
I don't
learned,
think that's
if we've
an
learned-
issue.
if we've learned anything from this, we are all compatible.
No, I meant electronically.
That's
All right,
totally different.
let me figure out what's going on here. So bear with me. What should I do now? I don't know how to get Shari on this.
What are you trying to do for her?
Send the invitation again.
Well, I can do that. I'll just
Okay.
let me
Oh,
do.
yeah. Yeah, I
In
could
the
do
meantime, can I ask, is the traffic sound interfering? I mean, should I put my earphones on? Can you hear?
I don't hear it.
I don't hear it.
You don't? Okay.
Nothing.
Okay.
And
We can probably mute
fortunately-
ourselves.
fortunately, the helicopters have stopped.
Yes, thank God.
Thank God, yeah.
But not the
We'll see if it-
Did
sirens.
anyone else find that very disturbing? I don't mean the noise. I mean
Yes.
the type of noise it is and what it implies.
It was very scary.
Yeah, I responded that.
You know what it reminds me of? After 9/11, when there was this constant undercurrent, overcurrent that I thought was the AWACS, but were really the helicopters, and it was constant.
Now I hear a siren. See, this is, and then we don't know what's going to happen tonight. So,
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, let
But
me.
it's been really quiet today,
No, it hasn't. Near us, yes. But my kids have watched into this morning all the looting at Saks and in the
Nike.
area.
Yeah, Nike got cleaned out, I guess.
And my kids are in
Well-
Brooklyn, right by the Barclay Center where there were major riots. So,
well, in Chicago, I have to say, I'm not a conspiracy theorist type, but the looting seemed to be very selective. What they chose was very selective. They had vehicles pulled up to
Right.
take their loot out. They had rented trailers to pull things out. It's either criminals. I mean, criminals in the sense it's organized crime,
Yeah.
or it's a political entity that's using this to get things to fund them. Just like Stalin used to rob banks for the early days of the Bolsheviks,
Right.
and the Nazis were robbing banks in the early 1920s and late teens in order to get money to run their organization. So who knows what this is?
They
But
also,
obviously-
the Russians also had Arm and Hammer.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily, outraged minorities. And in fact, I saw a
No.
lot of white people doing the looting when they showed TV footage.
Did anybody see Mayor Lightfoot do her update about 1:45 or 1:30?
No,
She was just excellent.
Very impressive.
really
She
good.
really-
I am
she
so
really-
happy we have her as a mayor. I
Yes.
can't tell you.
And Pritzker is the governor.
Exactly.
But she took this to a social level. She didn't point fingers. She took it to a level where we as a society had to deal with it. It's not going to go away.
Right.
She was really quite eloquent.
I
Well,
heard her.
hi, everybody.
Yeah, that's
Shall
What
we?
I love, I posted it on Facebook, was something that came out of my building via
Oh.
the mayor's office, where ongoing PSAs for openings. She's using Second City
Yeah.
because she figures it's impromptu, and who better to deal with an impromptu situation than an improv group. I think we're all here.
Okay, great.
So,
12 of us.
I guess our favorite recipes, or we don't need
no,
to. And
because
Sherry's not
I
going to
don't
be here.
know how to take the picture.
I actually know how to take a picture if you want me to
Okay.
try.
All right.
I can't hold up a cookbook though and do it, but I'm happy to try it.
Oh, I have to go get mine.
Barbara, I loved what you said about the family recipe, the heirloom recipe. And it prompted me to try to find, my mother had 3x5 index cards in a little metal box. And I know I own that box somewhere, and I've been looking since you sent your email for it. It's here.
I
Okay.
can't find my little
Thank
box,
you.
and I'm totally redoing the mushroom barley soup because there's no memories. All right.
I'm waiting for Diane.
Diane has to come back.
Diane's gotta come
Okay.
back.
Of course, these are unreadable in most cases, but that's okay.
I
Well,
love
this isn't a
Mars.
recipe. This
No,
is
it's an often used recipe.
Look at mine.
Yeah. I can't read any of yours.
Actually, I couldn't find the copy of this that is the one because it is broken at the place where the recipe is.
Oh, wow.
This is a newer
Ah,
version that I picked up. Yeah. And
Can I-
banana.
I'm giving you the name of the whole book here because this is as interesting to read as a story as it is the recipes. Dinner with Jackson Pollock.
Diane, can you put yours up, please? Okay, is everybody ready?
Ready?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, one more. Good.
Okay. Then
Thank
we
you.
did get to do this. One of the pleasures of this salon for me is getting to introduce my friends to my friends who now thoroughly know each other. But I met Jack at the same time I met Michael when friends introduced us at dinner. And what was the movie we saw? It was about a racehorse.
Oh, Secretariat.
Secretariat. And these friends said, I'm giving you each other as a gift. And they certainly were. And Jack is marvelous in that he's my personal fact checker. Jack, does this make any sense or is this a piece of shite? And I get straight answers. So I thought, who better? We all read the information on COVID and coming out, and it changes. And if we'd given this presentation even 2 weeks ago, it would be different information. So, Jack, where are we? What should we be doing? What shouldn't we be doing? What do we have to look forward to?
Well, you know, Betty sent an email saying that she couldn't come and she hopes that someone will record this so she knows what to do. And I don't know if you'll know what to do when I finish this, but I will hopefully give you the tools of information that you can then use to make your decisions. Because in reality, bottom line is that we're all going to have to, you know, make our risks versus benefits when it comes to what we're going to do before a vaccine or effective treatment shows up. And actually, I have to commend, Barbara has a very good doctor she goes to. I haven't met the gentleman, but he and his group communicate with them via email once a week. And his advice to her, which she may want to share with other people, is extremely good. Meaning, look at the facts as we know them now, decide what risks you personally are willing to take, and then make your decision based upon that. And I agree with Barbara also that things have evolved over 2 weeks. The most recent information that I'm going to give you in this presentation, and please forgive me because I usually don't, I haven't done this in a long time and I have notes, so I'll be looking down and trying not to read off of it and looking at you at the same time. But if I'm not perfect at this, so be it. But the most recent information on this, I was revising this up till Friday evening. So the last 48 hours, no, I may be behind the times. So you'll have to fill those 2 days in on your for yourself. I want to give you 3 definitions to start out with. I'm sure you all know this, and if I say things to you, you know, please forgive me. So what is a virus? That's the first step. Because actually this is important because Barbara sent me an email that she got from somebody, and I'm glad that I don't have a friend passing that information on, about a conspiracy theorist who claims that this is a bacterium and not a virus. And what's the difference between a virus and a bacterium? Well, a virus is an infectious agent that can only replicate inside a cell. It's made up of basically nucleic acid or genetic material, and there are only 2 kinds, DNA and RNA, and then a coating of several layers. And the bits on the coating allow it to attach to a cell, inject its genetic material into the cell, take over the cell's ability to reproduce, make more virus, and then the virus comes out of the cell so it can infect more cells. And that's essentially what this is. So what is SARS-CoV-2 is the virus, and that stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2. So that's the name of the virus. And the illness that people get from this virus is COVID-19. So those are the three definitions. COVID-19 is essentially stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019, and there's nothing magical about 2019. That's the year that it was described in. Interestingly, in 1912, German veterinarians were puzzling over a feverish cat that had a swollen belly, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. And in retrospect, it is now thought this is the first description of a clinical illness caused by a coronavirus. And what they didn't know at the time was that these viruses were actually pretty rampant throughout the animal kingdom, causing bronchitis in chickens. There was an outbreak of it that almost killed, that infected pigs in one country and killed almost every single piglet under the age of 2 weeks from a gastrointestinal disease. The link between these viruses and humans remained hidden until the 1960s, when researchers in the United Kingdom and the United States isolated 2 viruses with crown-like structures that were causing the common cold in humans. Scientists soon noticed that these viruses were very similar in structure, because they used the electron microscope, to the viruses that were causing very serious illnesses in animals. And they named the entire family of viruses coronaviruses, based on a crown-like appearance under the electron microscope. It was not known that these viruses could cause serious illness in people until 2003, when an outbreak of SARS, severe respiratory syndrome, occurred. And then they found out, oh my God, these viruses could easily kill people. And the one thing different between SARS-1, which is the SARS that we knew about, and the current one is that the old one is much more fatal, but much less contagious. So that is why it didn't cause the scourge that the current one is causing now. So when did COVID-19 actually make its appearance in the United States? Interestingly, on Friday, day before yesterday, the CDC, via a publication called the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I don't know if any of you subscribe to this, but I do.
It's a page turner.
Yeah, it's a page turner. Reported that 4 separate lines of evidence suggest that transmission in the United States likely began in late January and early February of 2020. After a single importation, one person brought this virus to the United States on the West Coast. And then there were several people who brought the virus from Europe to the East Coast. And it wasn't until late February that people began to notice. When I say people began to notice, because don't forget, not everybody who gets this is seriously ill. People were showing up with flu-like syndromes to emergency rooms, both in the East and West Coast. And the surveillance system set in place to report these things wasn't necessarily working as well as it should. I'm not going to go, by the way, I'm going to try not to go into polemics over how this country has responded, certainly, except in one instance. Now, as COVID, now that this virus has killed over 100,000 people in this country, and it's very interesting, just today again published, the mortality figures out of the CDC for the causes of death in this country for the last 4 months. And COVID virus is number 3, after heart disease and cancer. So it is an extremely serious, that alone ought to, I mean, more than stroke, more than diabetes, more than auto accidents, more than everything else except for the top 2, that ought to waken people's eyes up, but I'm not so sure. Anyway, I'm not going to go into the biology of this virus very much. We don't have the time, but there are 2 aspects of it that I would like to point out. The virus has evolved an array of adaptation that makes it more lethal than any other coronavirus humanity has met so far. One of which is its ability not only to affect the upper respiratory tract system, but the lower respiratory tract system as well. And so why is that important? Generally, influenza virus, the one that we've all been getting shots for, affects the upper respiratory tract system. When people get pneumonia from this and get really sick and die from it, it's generally because of a superimposed bacterial infection that gets them in their lungs. It's not the same virus that does this. SARS, on the other hand, would affect the lower respiratory tract, but one of the reasons why it doesn't kill as many, it isn't as contagious, is that it gets caught in the upper respiratory tract and less often goes down into the lung. And once it gets into the upper respiratory tract, it can't reproduce there. It doesn't cause illness. This particular virus goes into both places. And therefore, people can start out with a mild infection involving the upper respiratory tract, and then the virus starts reproducing and gets into the lungs, and that's where they start going south. And you remember reading about people who get this virus, who are pretty sick, they go to the hospital or they don't go to the hospital, they seem to be getting better, and then suddenly they get a lot worse. And it's those people who are getting the upper respiratory tract infection, and then it goes down into their lungs and causes havoc down there. Why this happens to some people and not others, we don't know. We all know the high risk groups, which we can talk about, but we don't know about this. The other thing that happens is that we know that what are the risk factors? You've all read about it. I can review this quickly. Age, hypertension, obesity, diabetes mellitus, chronic renal disease, pulmonary disease, use of chemotherapeutic agents, people who have cancer, and people who have HIV. Once it gets into the body, it can spread by the blood to the vascular tree, liver, kidneys, heart, and other organs. And actually, one of the nonsensical things in that email that Barbara sent me was that the clotting fat, you've all read about the clots. Why is this causing clotting? The virus, the receptor site on the cells, and I don't have to go into the details, called ACE2, are well located in the lining of blood vessels. So this virus then attaches to the lining of our blood vessels and initiates clots. And those patients who have these major blood clots that they see when they do autopsies and do biopsies, they see these viral inclusions inside the cells that line the blood vessels. So this is another way that this disease attacks the body. The other thing is it can be found in semen and stool. And in fact, you must read, I know you're all reading about this, that people do get gastrointestinal illness with this. They have diarrhea or loose stools. Viral particles are found in their stool. But in fact, so far, knock on wood, there hasn't been a lot or any reported cases of fecal oral contamination caused by this spread, causing the spread of this virus. Even though the virus seems to be excreted in the stool, I guess maybe all the hand washing admonishments have gotten people to be very careful about washing their hands when they use the bathroom or whatever, but they haven't really reported cases of the sole source of fecal oral contamination is causing this disease. Polio, you may remember, is actually caused by fecal oral contamination. That's how polio spreads, by people not being careful with hand washing, etc., after they've used the bathroom. There are two things that there's one other thing that I want to mention is when we're talking about the biology of the virus is the fact the virus, unlike other RNA viruses, this is an RNA virus. That means that the genetic material is RNA rather than DNA. Most of them don't have self-correction. What does that mean? When the virus causes a cell to make more virus, it generates more of this genetic material. Very commonly, errors are done in the genetic makeup of the virus. This is what causes the virus to have this antigenetic shift. Why? And this happens very commonly, let's say in influenza, which is why every single year we have to get a different flu shot depending on how many accidents have occurred in reproducing the virus and changing its antigenetic code. This virus has a self-correcting mechanism. In other words, it has a way of detecting errors in its reproduction and fixing them. That, as it turns out, is actually a good thing for us. Why? Because it's unlikely there's going to be significant genetic shifting. In other words, and in fact, there is an international consortium that looks at mutations. And this virus has up to last week has only mutated 13 times in all this period of time. And that's because of this self-correcting mechanism it has. Now, why is that important for us? First of all, so far the mutations don't seem to change the way the body perceives the virus. That's not, and therefore, immunity that you acquire from a natural infection or from a vaccine is likely to be more long-lasting and may very well protect us from getting infected again. So that is a good aspect of this. But for good things, there's a bad thing. Why is that? Because certain antiviral drugs, which they have tried, work by inducing mutations in the virus to make it less strong or to make it easier to get rid of. And so all of these drugs like ribavirin, which have been used to treat other serious viral illnesses, don't work because the virus detects the errors and corrects them. So, and even a drug like a remdesivir, which you've all been reading about, has essentially, for that reason, only modest effects. I'm not saying that it's not a good thing, and the New England Journal, published the results, and we've been reading about it, and more is to come out. But it doesn't seem to be, it's certainly not the lifesaver for everybody. In fact, the reduction in mortality in those patients was not statistically significant. There was a tendency for them to survive better, but it isn't like this is the miracle drug. However, I feel better about it because it means that there is a possibility of developing antiviral drugs which will work. They just have to figure out how to do it and which part of the virus to work on. But the fact that they have one that has already worked is a good sign. So I hope I'm not going too fast and too technical. Okay.
It's fabulous.
All right, thank you. Well, we all need to be felt that we're doing the right thing. So how is this infection acquired? The simple answer is from someone who is or are infected with it. And the mechanism is the contamination of the nose, mouth, and eyes with droplets from the infected person or person who is coughing, sneezing, singing, speaking, spitting, etc. Environmental contamination plays a role, but to a much lesser degree, and we'll talk about this later. Somebody, I think it was Joseph, who sent me some questions about this. Not you, maybe not. Yeah, you did. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. What is unclear is the exact mode of transmission. What is the required inoculum size? What is the optimal period of transmission from the infected person, and how all of this interacts with environmental factors. Droplets generally do not travel more than 6 feet from speech, and we're going to talk about this business of social distancing and how we come up with the 6 feet thing, which is probably wrong, but it's probably longer actually. But can spread much farther with coughing and especially sneezing. And these regular particles do not linger in the air long and fall to the ground. And this is going to be something, again, I'll talk in more detail about when we talk about masks. There are things called microdroplets, which are also produced, and these are much smaller. There are like 5 microns. So what is a 5 micron? It's about the size of a red cell. So if you got an idea of how tiny red blood vessels are, that's what the size of these microdroplets are. And in fact, there are others that are even smaller. we don't really know how important these are in the spread of the disease, but theoretically they are. Now, WHO recommends a social distancing of 6 feet and hand washing, of course. But the studies that looked at this, the 6 feet thing, they were done in the 1930s, before they were able to have the high technology that we've got to see actually how far droplets spread. Measurements now show that intense coughs and sneezing can propel large droplets more than 20 feet. And they also create thousands of aerosols that can travel even further. Increasing evidence of SARS-CoV-2 suggests that the 6 feet WHO recommendation is likely not large enough for indoor conditions, certainly. And we're going to talk about indoor versus outdoor, where aerosols remain in the air for hours and accumulate over time. And given how little is known about the production and airborne behavior of infectious respiratory droplets, it's impossible to define safe distances for social distancing. And again, I'll get into some more details when we talk about masks, but that 6 feet figure is a minimum, not a maximum. And as a minimum, it's not all that great. Certainly not for indoor exposure or to avoid exposure inside. The precise period of time that someone with COVID-19 is infectious is not really well known. It is, however, clear, and you've been reading about this, that they are infectious at least 2 or 3 days before they develop any symptoms, if they develop any symptoms. So, and it's now estimated that 45 to 50% of a community-acquired infections are caused by transmission from people who are either asymptomatic or who have minimum symptoms and within the 2 or 3 day period before they actually get symptomatic. So these people are very dangerous. And unfortunately, they don't know who they are, because if you don't have symptoms and you get sick, it's very, very hard. So when are they infectious? Well, the suggestion is that 2 or 3 days before they become sick, and their peak is probably the first 7 days of their illness. And then what about at the other end? Once they've recovered, probably by day 9 or 10, their infectious levels are very low. And in fact, after 9 days, they have a hard time recovering virus that they can grow in tissue culture, or say that the virus is gone. And when you think about it, that's where that 14-day period comes in. 2 or 3 days before, 9 days after, it all adds up into a reasonable 14-day period. Those people who are unfortunately in ICUs and sick for extended periods of time, they're clearly not in this equation. Let me see where I am here. I thought I'd be reading my notes, and I'm not, so I have to look down to see where I am in this. Oh, what about relapse? Because you've read a little bit about relapse. Relapse meaning you get better, and from the same infection, you get worse again. Well, as I said, some people will get worse once the virus gets down to their lower lungs or gets disseminated, but that's really the same illness. But what about these soldiers or sailors or whatever? Remember, when we talk about testing, they're not actually, in most cases, testing for live virus. Or that is, actually viruses are not live. Viruses which can infect tissue. What they're really testing for is the nucleic acid, the RNA that makes up the genetic material. That material can be in pieces or broken apart or not connected with the rest of the virus that's needed to cause infection. And it can be detected. And that's actually when they do these molecular tests, like, with the swabs and all that, they're not checking for live virus or a virus that can infect cells. They're actually checking for the RNA, that's the genetic material of the virus. So people can cough up or get rid of viral particles or pieces of red viral particles that will actually show up as a positive test. And therefore, those people who they thought might be getting relapses really weren't getting relapses. They were checking them and they were spewing out these little bits of genetic material from viruses that can't infect anybody else or themselves. It reminds me sort of like certain bacterial infections like TB. If you treat someone for active tuberculosis, they might be coughing out TB bacilli for an extended period. But those TB bacilli are dead. In other words, after 2 or 3 weeks, if someone does a sputum sample, let's say 6 weeks later, and they look at it under the microscope and they see TB bugs, those people are not causing infections because what they're doing is coughing out the dead bacteria from their lungs. And this is somewhat of a similar analogy, although viruses in of themselves are not alive. As I said, they need, if living means reproducing, that means that they need to be inside a cell. Where are we here? Sorry. Okay. Now I want to talk a little bit about the droplets because we're going to go into the mask situation. The risk of transmission from an individual depends upon a number of factors, including the type and duration of exposure and likely individual characteristics. We mentioned some of them, age, whatever. Although it does not, the data is not perfect, it appears, and this is sort of scary, that it only takes about 1,000 viral particles to infect a susceptible individual. To me, that sounds like a very low number, and it may not be true. I'm sort of hoping it's not. Each cough or sneeze can project up to 3,000 to 30,000 droplets, and each droplet contains 200 million viral particles. So to me, those numbers sound pretty scary. Someone coughs or sneezes, out comes thousands of droplets, and each one has 20 to 30 million viruses. No, each droplet 200 million viral particles, and it only takes 1,000 to infect you. Most cases, as you know, have been described in households, hospitals, when PPE is not used, long-term care facilities, and closed settings like cruise ships. Now, of course, we've seen disturbing clusters in places like churches, family gatherings, work, choir practices, and restaurants. We now know, of course, that simple speech and singing especially can spew out lots of these droplets. 6 feet, the 6 feet separation rule does not help if one is exposed over hours and air currents are favorable to spread of the virus. When WHO gives guidance on who is the contact, in other words, you come down with the virus and they are going to check your contacts. And they first start out by giving you a questionnaire. The criteria is someone who is less than 6 feet away for 15 minutes from you. Anybody who has been close to you 6 feet and for 15 minutes is someone they're going to test or put in quarantine. Then there are people who are called super spreaders. Different pathogens, reproductive numbers is how many people are infected on average by one person. And when it comes to COVID-19 or SARS, I should say SARS-CoV-2, it's 2 to 3. So on average, a individual will infect 2 or 3 other people. However, these super spreaders, they can infect hundreds of people. And what's not known is who they are and why are they able to do this. That isn't coming out. So now it's thought, given these super spreader episodes, that 10% of the people who are infected are causing 80% of the new infections. as things open up, social distancing in of itself is not going to be enough. And I want to share something with you. You may have read this yourself because it's been published in the weekly morbidity and mortality report, but it's been in the lay press, and it has to do with a restaurant in which, and after all, you can't wear a mask in a restaurant. I'm sorry. You have to have the mask off in order to eat. Yes, Merle. Oh, you made a noise and it switched to you. Okay, that's okay. So here we have a man sitting at a table with 9 other people who was asymptomatic and didn't know he was ill. And they sat there for an hour and a half having dinner. And he didn't sneeze, he didn't cough, all he did is talk. And breathe, of course. 50% of the people who were sitting at the table with him got sick over the next 7 days. What's more scary to me is that 75% of the people downwind from that table, over 14 feet away, became ill. And of those people, 2 died. And 2 out of the 7 people who were sitting at a table on the other side, 14 feet away, upwind, got sick. So what happened, of course, is the air conditioner, he's talking, the air conditioner got his droplets and took them quite nicely across the restaurant, 14 feet to that table over there. And because of eddy currents around him, it went to the table in the other direction. Okay, sorry, indoor restaurants, as far as I'm concerned, forget it. No way are they going to be safe. Except we can talk about the possibility of, remember, these people are not wearing face masks. You can't wear a face mask in a restaurant. I don't think. They'll figure it out, but right now it isn't working. So that takes care of the indoor restaurants. I don't care if they put the tables, 6 feet apart and the servers are, swathed up in a way that looks like, the only thing showing are their 2 eyes. It isn't going to work. What about outdoor environments, which we're seeing a lot now? There are numerous factors will determine the concentrations and the distance traveled and whether respiratory viruses remain in aerosol. Breezes and winds can occur and often do, and they transport droplets long distances. Asymptomatic individuals who are speaking while exercising or coughing or sneezing and spitting can release infectious aerosols picked up by airstreams. Now, it is true that SARS-CoV-2 is inactivated by sunlight. And increases of humidity and temperature may cause these respiratory viruses to drop. On the other hand, quickly to the ground. On the other hand, it's not instantaneous. So in fact, the runner who is panting and approaching you without a mask from your rear and then passes you, God forbid they should cough or sneeze as they pass you by, you're going to get a face full of virus. I don't care how they try to say it's safe to be outside without masks. Ultimately, there are very few studies, and I have to admit this, that have looked into the transmission of this virus in the outdoor settings. I think as things open up, as there are more people outside congregating in groups, and we've seen pictures, we're going to find out, and they do trace analysis. And by the way, when they do these trace analysis in large groups, they try to figure out where these people were when they got exposed and on and on and on, if they can. We will get more information on this. But I am very much against people not wearing masks in outdoor settings, and we're going to talk about them right now. Which is why when Michael and I go out and see 10% of the people we see on the street wearing masks and the rest of them not, it makes me not want to walk. I feel like I'm playing dodgeball. But I may be oversensitive about this, but I don't think so, because one never knows I think Penelope said last week about in regard to infection or possible exposure, that whatever the reduction risk was in certain situations, it's not zero. And that is exactly correct. It's not zero. And we don't know that that person walking towards you or walking behind you or running towards you or running behind you isn't, as they pass you by without a mask, going to cough or sneeze. There's no way of knowing that until after they've gone by. Well, I don't know about you, but it makes me quite anxious not knowing what to do about these things. More than 100 countries require masks for people to venture out of their homes. In the USA, masks as an official public health recommendation had a very rocky start. And I think this is part of the confusion, but I also think that people don't want to change their mind because it doesn't fit in with what they want to do. Initially, you may recall that we were told masks weren't necessary, they weren't going to do any good, they weren't going to work, we need them. And people said yes, but they looked at it from the wrong way. They looked at it as protecting you from getting infected from somebody else who was positive and who was expelling virus particles at you. And yes, most masks do not protect you that way. What they do protect is the environment and the other person if you happen to be infected, because they're much better at that kind of protection than they are the other way around. The other way around are those N95 masks. And when in fact, N95 masks are very good at protecting you from getting infection, but they are very poor at preventing you from spreading your virus out. Why? Because they have a valve, and that valve opens up and allows you to breathe through it. So yes, when you take a breath, the filtering of the N95 is very good at filtering out small particles, but then when you exhale, out comes your breath through that hole. So that in fact, an N95 mask is not a good thing to prevent community spread of the virus. It's very good for you to put on, okay, when you go see your doctor or when you go to the hairdresser, if that ever happens. Because if the hairdresser has the infection, this is going to help filter out the viral particles, but not as a public health measure. So that's why they gave out that information that wasn't really cogent for as a large public health measure. The second thing is there were no, oh, by the way, let me go back. How does this regular mask help you? It creates from spreading the virus, if it doesn't filter that well, it creates a microenvironment here where you have a high humidity atmosphere between the interior surface of the mask and your face. And if you are spewing viral particles, it makes those particles very heavy and sticky, and then it adheres to the inner surface of the mask. If some of them manage to get out of the mask, they'll get out on the outside surface and stick to the fabric that way. And so these are very good at helping to prevent the dissemination of the virus out. In addition, if the person is also maintaining 6 feet away, this reduces the possibility of transmission of the virus between 80 and 98%. So it's very good at helping to prevent this spread. If everybody wore a cloth mask in public, whether inside or outside, if 80%, there is a possibility that this virus would stop. And if you think about it for a moment, how long we've been on lockdown?
Yeah.
3 months, whatever, most of us. If people were hand washing and wearing masks religiously, you would not see the numbers of infections that we're seeing now. In fact, we might be almost eradicating the transmission. But because we're not doing this for a variety of reasons, we're being this pandemic is being stretched on and on and on, and the economic and social distress that it's causing is being prolonged. So every time I see one of these people walking around without a mask on, I'm saying to them, myself and Michael, do they really realize how much they're stretching this on, their misery and the misery of everybody around them? Or do they care? I don't know. I think they would care if they understood it, but they don't really care, I guess. Anyway, so masking with cloth masks, not N95s, are essential. They should be done every time you go out of your house. If you manage to visit with people under certain circumstances, everybody ought to be masked. Now, do your household contacts have to be, your husbands and your wives or lovers have to be masks if they're living with you and not going out? No. Within the house, you don't need to wear a mask. If you're going to go out to the grocery store, you better have one on. Hopefully everybody in the grocery store is wearing one as well, and that they won't let people in who aren't. And maintain the social distancing of at least 6 feet with the mask on. That's probably adequate. Let's see. Oh, what about face shields? I'm sorry Anu isn't on the call because everybody see that picture she sent me, and I don't know, Barbara and maybe a few others, of the interior of that airplane? I thought that was terrific. I thought that was terrific. In fact, when I get a face shield, I think I'm going to wear one inside the grocery store with my mask on. Why not? There was a man who was on television, I don't know if you all saw him as well, who is a virologist. And this is an expert in viruses, a PhD expert in viruses. And he came down with COVID-19. And he couldn't understand how he got this, because he's been hand washing, he's been wearing his mask, he's been as careful as he possibly could be. And he's sitting down in his hospital bed on television through whatever, trying to figure this out. And he decided it was because he did not have his eyes shielded. And he went on an airplane and he developed this from transmission into his eye. Then there were a group, and some people said, oh, we think that's pretty far-fetched. No, it isn't actually, but I'll tell you why it's not in a second. How many of you have ever cried and gotten tears dripping into your throat from your lacrimal glands? The fact is that our eye, covered with tears, has a very nice drainage system that goes into the back of our throat. And many of us aren't even aware of it until they get plugged up, and then suddenly the tears are draining out of our eyes, and we don't understand why is this happening? Because the lacrimal gland is not doing its drainage. So the eye is perfectly well connected to the throat, which is perfectly well connected to the rest of the respiratory tract. All right. So what did these scientists do? They went ahead and did assays of the receptor sites on the membranes covering the eye and the lining of the lacrimal gland. And lo and behold, ACE2 receptors are all over the place. So the fact is that these viruses are spreading into people from their eyes. And yes, I think our regular eyeglasses are giving that we're all old, well, except for a few. I'm sorry, I'm looking at her. And you, Diane, you'll never get old. Anyway, we don't wear glasses normally, but those of us who do have some protection against this direct spray, but nothing like a face shield. Face shields are going to be wonderful. They come in various forms. They're all, they're made out of plastics that cover the face. Just a few little questions, things about them. You have to have a tight seal of the part on the top that is attaching the shield to your head. So there can't be any gaps or holes. The shield should go back far enough to cover your ears and extend below your chin by 2 or 3 inches. Now, Michael and I decided to measure the distance between what we thought was going to be where the band might be, the end of our chin. And lo and behold, it turned out to be 8 inches. So all I can say is I might suggest that if you're thinking about buying a face shield, go ahead and take your measurements and make sure that the measurements of the face shield that you buy are going to be adequate to do all the covering. But I think when we're going to get some of those. Now, how well do they work? Actually, they work pretty good. They've checked the reduce the amount of inhaled particles. Even if someone coughs within 18 inches of you, it actually can reduce the aerosol by 80%. Now, granted, that's not 100%, but that's still a lot. So I think, and there have been other studies that actually show at a further distance. Remember, that person shouldn't be 18 inches away from you, should they? If they're 6 feet away, then 96 to 98% of that aerosol is not going to hit your face. So people are going to get startled because when we get our face shields, I'm going to be wearing a mask and a face shield every time I go into an indoor environment. And I don't know if that, and I might even do, if for some reason I become crazy and I actually go to a place where they're serving food outside, maybe a hot dog stand where I can sit 18 feet away from people, I might have the shield on and eat, eat that way, who knows? Anyway, but what about transmission from environmental surfaces?
Jack,
Yes,
the shields are open here.
yes.
Can't you receive virus there?
That's why they're not 100% effective. They're not hazmat suits. If you ever seen, I have to tell you, when we thought we were going to have an epidemic of Ebola, we did, and when I was chief of staff at Heinz, we were doing Ebola, rehearsals in the emergency room. We had a separate room for them to come in and on and on and on. We had our people in hazmat suits. So those hazmat suits, that has a hood that goes over you, and you're like, totally mummified. So you're right. There is, and when you talk about your face masks, Michael and I ordered some of those blue ones. They came, and they turn out not to fit properly because there's enough space on either side of them where they don't block. They're very little. They don't even produce that little micro atmosphere that you want to have that increases the humidity in there. So they have to. That's the one thing about N95s. I don't know if any of you have worn them. They really are uncomfortable because they have to push against your skin and completely seal off this area. Now you might say to me, "You've got a beard. What kind of seal can that be?" The fact is that you have to shave your beard. Well, guess what? Michael has shaved a path on this side and shaved a path on that side and underneath my chin. So if I put an N95, there's actually skin there and not hair. And so.
And Michael too?
No, he has a different philosophy, So he uses a bandana. He pretends he's the Long Ranger. No, actually, no, he doesn't wear an N95. Although I actually wanted to shave my beard off completely and got a firm no on that one.
Can I say my philosophy?
Yes, go ahead.
My philosophy, I've got such a heavy beard that when I use a surgical mask, I don't use an N95, and I do a very tight seal on my nose. I just had surgery on my nose, so I make sure it's higher, it's above the scar tissue, so it's very tight, and I make sure that the elastic is tight behind me, so when the fiber comes in contact with my beard, it feels to me to be very tight, and then under my chin, if you've ever noticed, if you've got good contact, it really is quite a good seal. So I feel that the surgical mask is good enough for me. Plus, I always make sure that I'm over 6 feet in terms of physical distancing whenever we meet anybody on the street or whenever we come in contact with anybody else outside. So that's my thinking.
I think that for most situations, again, prolonged, the trick here is prolonged contact and short distances. That is the risky thing. So going to a dentist, for example, for a routine dental appointment, I'm not quite sure. First of all, you can't wear a mask. I'm not so sure that that's completely safe. Unless, you know, because the dentist would have to basically seal himself off from you. The actual surface area, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is very safe. Dentists have been extremely careful recently because of blood-borne diseases to keep their instruments and operatories extremely clean. So that's not the issue. The issue would be whether the dentist was asymptomatic with SARS-CoV-2 and could spread the infection to you because he's standing right next to you during the time, or the dental hygienist, and you are a very close distance and you have no way of masking. With a haircut, obviously the hair salon or the haircut person cannot be far away from you, but they can be masked and you can be masked. And that reduces the risk. Oh, let's go back to the cleaning of surfaces. What they found is that it's probably less important as far as numbers.
Hello? You have what? Could you wait, please? I'm in a meeting. Thank you.
I'm glad they didn't ask you, how come you have people in your apartment? But that's okay. For the meeting. But so it's been very, and there have been studies, as you all read, you know, the virus stays viable on plastic surfaces for 17 hours, steel for 48 hours, copper for less than 4, you know, paper products or cardboard or cloth probably for less than 24 hours. I think you have to be reasonable when it comes to, for example, you ordered a book from Amazon or some things from Amazon and they deliver to you a cardboard box. Fine, you can wipe down the cardboard box, but the interior you probably don't have to do anything with. How long has that book been sitting in there? 2 or 3 days before it ever get to you. Now, some people are more paranoid about these things than others. What do you do about vegetables that come from the market? You can wipe down the plastic bag and remove them. Do you have to disinfect the vegetables? Absolutely not. No one has shown that anybody has gotten COVID-19 from eating lettuce. There are other things you can get from eating lettuce, and you certainly would wash the lettuce before you served it. But COVID-19 isn't coming in through the eggplant. So I know people who will change, they'll go to the store, they take off their shoes, they wipe their shoes down. I don't know anyone who would eat. I mean, you're not going to handle your shoes and then eat something or touch your face. You're going to wash your hands anyway. But they change their clothes. That's not necessary to do that unless someone sneezed on you, you know, in which case I would stop shopping. First thing I would do is pull out my hand sanitizer, make sure those are clean, and then drive myself home and take the clothes off or do whatever I'm going to do with them. But I think you have to be, now, let me just say this to you. You will be as careful as you want to be. But is it totally necessary to do this? I don't think so. The virus, and then again, after you've touched things and put things away, you wash your hands and keep them off your face. The masks you wear, if they're cloth, you can, now they've got these ultraviolet little chambers that people are using to sterilize their phones. You could put your mask in there or put it aside and rest it for 2 or 3 days and use a different one. After 2 or 3 days, the mask isn't going to be infectious because theoretically, there might be viral particles on the outside. Again, social distancing, hand washing and keeping the masks, rotating your masks, or if you want to launder them, you can launder them. I put ours in our little ultraviolet container to sterilize them there. Or you can just leave them alone for several days and use a different one. The virus is not going to stay viable on your cloth mask for protracted periods. It just doesn't. So now I'm going to switch subjects again and talk a little bit about testing. And then I'm almost done, and then you will be able to, well, not really. We have to talk about herd immunity, and we'll talk about testing, but I'll try to make this quick. The United States approach to this pandemic was a mistake to start with. What should have happened was done in other countries, which was do extensive testing, socially isolate the people who are positive and their traces. We didn't have the personnel, we didn't have the testing, and then we had a government who didn't think it was necessary. And we still are not doing this. And those countries that are most successful in controlling this virus actually took that approach. What's really scary is how actually the tests probably underrepresent the number of people infected. And this is actually important when we talk about herd immunity in a minute. And I'm going to give you a study that was recently published looking at people with antibodies. So these antibody tests, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, identify people who have had the infection, not who are currently sick. So they went to Los Angeles, and they found that 4.65% of the population, or something like 367,000 individuals, had antibodies against SARS-CoV-2. The number of people, so there's 367,000 people. The number of people who were actually reported as positive because they were tested with the RNA test was 8,430. There was another recently startling bit of data that every woman who goes to a hospital, actually all inpatients in New York right now are being checked for COVID. And and so 16% of women who are presenting to the New York hospitals to deliver their babies are positive for COVID-19. And 10% of their caregivers are positive. So the prevalence of this disease is really, really high, but not high enough. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to the specific testing, because people ask me about it. There are two kinds of tests right now for COVID, for being infected with the virus. One is a molecular diagnostic test, and I actually discussed it with you. What they're looking at are pieces of the genetic material of the virus. They're checking for that, and if it's there, then you've been infected with the virus. And if it's not, you might not be affected with the virus. It depends on how prevalent it is in the community. And then what they're doing is repeating these tests again. There's new tests called antigen tests, looking at not just the RNA, but other bits of the virus. And those have just come out. And they're not probably as sensitive as the molecular test. What about the antibody test that you read about? I just saw this country is amazing. I saw an ad on television from a dermatology group advertising antibody tests. So come in and get your antibody test. There are no licensed tests that the FDA has licensed for dissemination right now in the United States for you to go in someone's office. Now, there are tests that are being done and people are doing them. And what they're looking at is for the antibodies that this virus infection produces within the first week and more likely the second and third week after the person has gotten sick. And they're looking at IgG and IgM antibodies, and I have to go into the specifics of that. And they're reporting them, they're not looking at titers, they're reporting them as either positive or negative or intermediate. The problem is there's cross-reactivity of these antibodies with other COVID viruses. And in fact, they're currently looking into the fact that some people who've been infected with other types of COVID virus seem to have a modified clinical regime with the COVID virus, meaning they have partial immunity. So they're picking up antibodies against other COVID viruses, which are very common, like influenza or cold viruses, which aren't necessarily specific for this particular virus. And what they also don't know is how protective they are. Now, let me just explain what I mean by that. There are a couple different kinds of antibodies. One are called neutralizing antibodies. And neutralizing antibodies are antibodies thought to actually affect the ability of the virus to make you sick. And what they do is they attach themselves to those little spikes and interfere with the ability of the virus to inject its genetic material into a cell. Neutralizing antibodies are the kinds of antibodies that may very well be protective. And these are the antibodies that people get after they've gotten sick. And you read about them when they talk about vaccines that you might have read in the newspapers or heard on television. The difficulty there is these antibody tests that they're being given out or that they're doing at the dermatology clinic. I guess they can't see enough people with skin problems because no one's coming, so they have to figure out a way of making money. Those are not checking specifically for neutralizing antibodies. And therefore, the test may or may not tell you whether or not you can get sick again, because not everybody will make neutralizing antibodies after they've gotten ill. And so with that uncertainty, nobody is necessarily recommending that A, you get a test, and B, the test, and this is really what's important, informs you as to what you can do or can't do. Because if you get a test and it comes back positive, does that mean you don't have to do social distancing and wear a mask and all that? Nobody at this stage is going to tell you that because they don't know that. And it's a very foolhardy and dangerous thing to suggest to anybody. So yes, you might give you psychological, be upbeat. I don't know. It wouldn't give me necessarily one. If I didn't know that I could go to a restaurant now and have a meal, should one open up. Anyway, let's talk about herd immunity for a minute because people talk about that. Herd immunity is when most of the population have had an infectious disease and developed immunity to it, and those of us who aren't immune or who haven't been vaccinated benefit from it. For example, if 80% of the population is immune to a virus, 4 out of every 5 people you encounter, they won't be able to infect you with the infection, and therefore you're protected. Now, what's this number for what percentage of people in this country have COVID-19 in order for us to get herd immunity? The figure is controversial. The lowest one is 70%, and the top figure is 90%. So for those of us who are susceptible and to be protected against infection, 70 to 90% of our fellow Americans have to either have gotten this illness or have developed immunity through a vaccine. So far, no country has even approached this. Stockholm, as you know, Sweden has taken a certain tack towards this. Right now, the figure is 7.3% of people in Stockholm have antibodies. In the rest of the country, it's between 3.7 and 4.2. The death rate per capita in Sweden is now the highest in the world. And in order to achieve herd immunity in that country, 50,000 people will have to die. And that's from a country that has a population of 10 million. Now, I don't know. I don't run I guess I'm not the king of Sweden. I don't know if he has anything to say about it, or the queen, but to actually have 50,000 of your people to die in your country in order for 10 million others to have herd immunity sounds like a pretty hefty price. Think about, we have close to what, 300 million in this country?
More than 300, I like 370, something like that.
Something like that. And we've already had over 100,000 die. How many would actually have to die in order for us to achieve herd immunity here? The figure is just mind-boggling. Right now, there's some data, sorry, from metropolitan areas in the world. New York City, which was our epicenter, has about 19% of the people in New York are now showing on surveys antibodies to SARS-CoV-19. In London, it's 17.5%, Madrid 11.3%, Wuhan 10%, Boston 9.9%, Barcelona 7.1%. No country in the world is approaching levels necessary in order to achieve herd immunity from this disease. So I think that is a concept to achieve normality is simply not tenable. We can't have tens of millions of people dying in order to achieve the herd immunity. What about drugs to prevent infections? I don't want to get sick. I want to take something that'll keep me well. There are no such things. There are no drugs currently now that anybody can tell you to take that will prevent you from getting sick. Zero. Now, it's very interesting that researchers have used a computer program to try to identify possible medications that might help. And how do they know this? They look at the 7 or 8 steps that the virus does in order to get us sick. And they look for vulnerable points, something that may block this particular enzyme, something that may block this particular process. And they've run 50,000 known drugs through this program. Oh. And they've come up with 30. Now, we're not talking about making new things. We're talking about stuff that's here. And so far, they're testing them. And even the one that's most notorious, which is hydroxychloroquine, the story of that one could take an hour and a half talk just on that alone. But I have to tell you that it doesn't work on sick people. Now, the data does not show that it helps anybody who's actually sick with this disease. However, what about taking it to prevent it? Well, the idea originally, by the way, theoretically was not a bad one because it does block receptors, but no one had really tested it, and the French research that touted it in first was complete poop, and the man is disgraced, and the journal retracted it, and they've been plummeted. But there are currently studies being done in this country and elsewhere to see if that drug has any use at all in the prevention of the disease. And the President of the United States, as you know, has said that he has taken it for this purpose, although as far as I'm concerned, the doctor who prescribed it was guilty of malpractice, but that's a different issue. The end result, however, of unintended consequences is that there's a shortage of the medication for those people who really can benefit from it and who can't get it for their rheumatoid arthritis or for their lupus or for a number of illnesses that are actually helped by this drug. So far, there are none. And then you see things like nicotine. You remember that talk about a nicotine patch, because again, this was a medicine that was thought to hit on receptors. You've heard things about vitamin D. Vitamin D and calcium seem to treat everything. I'm amazed over Alzheimer's disease, hair loss. I made that part up, but I'm just saying, so far, everything is being looked at. They are actually putting studies together to see whether or not any of these medicines are useful. And it would be lovely if one of them actually worked. because it would be licensed, the profile is known, how dangerous it is, et cetera, et cetera. The other kinds of drugs would be to develop antivirals, like remdesivir, which actually was developed really fast and is being tested. Unfortunately, that takes a long time. Think about how long it took to find drugs that were effective against HIV. They turned out to be very effective. We have drugs that can cure people with hepatitis C. And so there is the possibility, and the fact that remdesivir did have biological activity against this virus suggests to me that they will find something. But again, it's not going to happen in 5 days. And that's one of the things that I have to caution people about. The unintended consequences of using unproven treatments can be fraught with real danger. And that brings us to the use of vaccines. My belief, again, personally, and I may be Pollyanna, but I think that they are going to develop a vaccine, and I do think that they're going to find that neutralizing antibodies do prevent, to a degree, this illness. And it may very well be that even though the vaccine will not prevent you from getting sick, the vaccine may prevent those people who get sick from dying those terrible deaths that they're all going through. And so right now, we're talking about 25 or 26 separate efforts, or even more, racing the clock to find a vaccine. The one vaccine that sort of makes me pause. So they're using RNA and DNA vaccines. What are they doing to that? They're not telling us, by the way, how they're injecting these vaccines into cells. That part hasn't been published. But they're developing an RNA, for example, like the genetic material of the virus, which will go into the body, enter the cells, and get the cells to produce molecules, antigens, and release them into the body, and the body will then develop antibodies against them. And these antigens, that their molecules could be 3 or 4 different parts of the little spiky thing that attach, or some other vital part of the virus. So they're inducing the body to make antibodies against these vital parts by genetically engineering our cells to produce these antigens and spew them out into our blood. That's actually pretty scary to me. But the one that's really scary, the RNA is not taken part, it does not become part of our genome, our own genetic material, because it stays outside the nucleus of a cell. But DNA has the potential, and they're using DNA to do the same thing, to actually integrate itself into our own genome. And think about the people who refuse to eat biologically or genetically engineered food, in which there's absolutely no possibility that that biological engineered material becomes part of our body permanently, versus injecting us with DNA that actually enters our cells and does some work. I don't know how safe that's going to be over the long run, and I don't know how acceptable that kind of vaccine will be to a whole bunch of people. I certainly would think twice about it, personally, unless I knew exactly what studies they did and how they prevented that DNA from becoming part of our own genome. The other thing is to develop a vaccine the old-fashioned way, which was to take SARS virus, deactivate it to a degree, or put it into tissue culture, let it grow, harvest it, deactivate it to a degree, and inject it. And there are people who are doing this. This is the way we make flu virus. It doesn't seem to have as strong an antibody response, but that is another rate of the way they're doing this. Now, how long is this all going to take? It isn't going to be ready by October. I don't care how much the president jumps up and down. And I don't think it's going to be ready safely by the end of the year. I think we're looking at 2021 and perhaps the latter part of 2021 at the very earliest, if they're going to do this in a safe manner that works. And the other question is, if they come up with 2 or 3 or 4 different vaccines, which ones are we going to get? Or which ones are we going to take? All of this has to be sorted out. And then, of course, there's the logistical issue of developing enough little vials and a lot of stoppers and all the other things that become where the vaccine is packaged. I mean, one of the problems we're having now with eggs, for example, we had a shortage of eggs for a while, maybe still, and the price of eggs went up. Why? Because most of eggs which are produced are put into large cartons that are sent to restaurants or to factories where they make things with them. And the holdup with the eggs was the fact that they didn't have enough those little dozen things that we all buy where we go to the grocery store. They couldn't package them properly. And that's why there was a shortage of them. Of course, people were running in, getting eggs because they thought the food chain would disappear. But it wasn't that. It wasn't the increased demand. They just couldn't package them properly. So now we've developed a vaccine and they've got to package it for 2 billion people. How fast is that going to happen? So we have, our problem, look about this country where the farmers are killing animals and throwing food away. And yet there are whole swaths of the population and shortages in grocery stores, and that's all a distribution problem. This isn't rocket science, and a minimal amount of proactive help could fix this, but they don't. Anyway, so let's see. All right, lastly, I've already said it. I am not, I think that a rush to provide unproven treatments is dangerous. And I've seen this when it came to AIDS virus and a couple other things that I've lived through. So we all have to be, the 2 words we ought to think about are prudence and patience when it comes to this. What happens if you get sick with this? And I'm going to focus mostly on our age group, although there are some younger people here. If you, right now in New York City, if you are our age and you are sick enough to wind up in the hospital, remember, most patients with COVID-19 do not get hospitalized. The great vast majority do not get hospitalized. If you wind up in the hospital with this, you only have a 66%, and not the ICU, you only have a 66% chance of emerging from that hospital alive. If you wind up in the ICU, that figure drops to 40%. If you manage to wind up on a ventilator and dialysis, because a lot of these patients are developing acute renal failure, your chances of living and being discharged from the hospital falls into the single digits. So this is a very serious disease for those of us who get really sick with it. And the mortality, overall mortality, because we're taking all comers, we're not talking about people who get hospitalized. I gave you the worst case scenario. Between 70 and 79%, it's about 8.07% mortality. And for those of us over 80, it's 14.8%. So this is a very bad disease for us oldsters. I have my 74th birthday today. I fall into that.
Oh.
70 and 79. Oh, well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And there's one other aspect that I want to mention, and then I'll shut up and be available for any questions. The mortality rates and the figures don't tell the whole story. There are people who recover from this illness who have serious morbidity from it, serious morbidity, prolonged weakness, permanent heart damage, permanent lung damage, increased mortality from common infections, dementia even, loss of limbs secondary to clots, strokes. These numbers have not been published as far as how common this is. But I suggest, like any war, in which you look at the wounded versus the survivors or the people who were killed, that those numbers are much higher than those individuals who simply died from this infection. And the havoc that it has wreaked, forget the economy for a minute, we're talking about on human beings, is much greater than the mortality figures would suggest. And those, I suspect, will be coming out within the next 6 months as the statisticians gradually gather the information. How many people at 6 months post-recovery are still ill, with what problems? How many people post a year illness? And then how many people are permanently maimed from this disease? We don't know yet, but it's not insignificant. Anyway, I've said what I was going to say. I hope it gave you enough information, and I will be answering questions if you have questions.
Jack, you're phenomenal.
Great story.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, guys.
May I ask a question?
Of course.
Self-containing mechanism. You say this is really a smart little bug. How can that be translated to our own cells so that we can combat cancer or other diseases?
You know what? I may be ignorant, but I'm not quite sure I actually understood the question.
Maybe I didn't understand what you were saying, which is very possible.
I think you're alluding to, yes, I've got it now. I think you're alluding to the fact that this virus is able to correct its genetic errors.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Now I understand you. And in fact, you're right. We actually do have those mechanisms within our own body, and they're happening all the time. The problem with cancer is that in certain situations, for a variety of reasons, which I can go into, and I'll talk about dealing with these self-correcting mechanisms fail. And certain cancers are very much better at defeating them than others. But indeed, there is a large avenue of research which is going on constantly by the molecular biologists, looking at mechanisms by which we can boost our own internal surveillance systems to suppress cancer. And in fact, we all do this naturally. But obviously, cancer being a very common illness, which is multifactorial, sometimes people get away. Most recently, I've been involved in looking at multiple myeloma associated with the use of Agent Orange, which was something that I did when I was at the VA, which dioxin is a known carcinogen. And what we found, of course, is that despite these internal, and multiple myeloma is essentially a malignancy of plasma cells in the body. It's a form, sort of like leukemia. It really isn't. What plasma cells do is make antibody. They're found in the bone marrow. And then suddenly a malignant stream becomes, and they start multiplying and do a lot of bad things to the body. We know this was induced by dioxin, which is a known carcinogen, because we sprayed it all over that country. And our own soldiers, as well as the Vietnamese, got it. But you're right. That is theoretically one way, boosting our own surveillance systems. There are people who believe that certain kinds of diets, certain kinds of foods, when they say boost our immune system, some of them may be talking about boosting our own internal surveillance systems to suppress cancer by correcting mutations, those mutations being involved in the production of cancerous cells. So that is going on. People are doing this. Now, am I personally aware of any effective treatment that's being offered based on this? I don't think so. But I'm not an oncologist and I'm not a researcher in this area. So it is possible that some of them may very well be looking at this in an effort to do it. But it's actually a very complicated system. In this virus, the enzyme system that it's set up is relatively simple. But don't forget, it's only looking at one type of genome And that genome is actually, that we're talking about the viral RNA, is very limited in what it's genetically telling the cells to do, unlike our genome, which is made up of all sorts of, genes. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but, I'm
Think
not
you
an
did.
expert in
Thank
that
you.
area.
Thank you.
Any other question? Diane,
That was so wonderful. Thank you.
you're welcome.
I was talking to our son's girlfriend last night who lives in New York, and she said that there were a couple of laundromats that got shut down because the virus was spreading from people putting their clothes in the washing machines and doing their clothes, and evidently it not killing the virus. And so the next person that puts in their clothes actually got the virus from.
I find that somewhat,
Yeah, people have been getting sick, really sick.
but it could be that they had some workers in there who were spreading it orally.
Oh, that could be. Mhm.
The issue, you see, this is what's happened with the environmental studies, because every single time they've looked for the environment that is a surface to be a cause of it, they've also noticed that the person actually was coughing or sneezing or talking
That makes
into the
a lot
environment.
more sense. Thank you. That actually makes a lot more sense. Yeah. And I also wanted to talk to you a little, just ask you maybe a little further about virus. I'm just trying to understand it. So you're saying that that it's not alive, and that it, so the way that it spreads is through the blood cell, and then the cell splits, right? Is that
Well,
right?
no, actually, sorry.
You catch
A
it?
little fruit. No, that damn thing is, my eyesight isn't so good anymore. Anyway, no, what happens is this. The virus has those little spiky things on it. You've seen pictures
Yeah,
of it.
I have, yeah.
So it comes close to, it comes to a cell in the respiratory tract
Uh-huh.
and attaches to a specific site, okay, that has a specific name. Once it does that, it starts a chain reaction of chemicals that allows its membrane to fuse with the cell's membrane. Then in goes the RNA. And again, interactions between its enzymes and what's inside the cells gets the cell to start making viral particles. Then once a certain number of viral particles are in there, they begin to leave the cell through openings, or they may even rupture the cell and then spread to other cells. And its sole purpose is to make more virus. That's all it does. And it causes all of this damage because of what's going on in the microchemical environment. And again, these receptors, these called ACE2 receptors on surfaces of cells, are found in a lot of cells. And so they're able, that's why they can infect the eye, that's why they can, once they invade the body and get into the blood, they can attach themselves to the blood vessel walls. But not everybody, this infection doesn't do this with everyone. And we don't know why. If, God forbid, all of us came down with the disease, yes, something based on our chronic illnesses or whatever, but let's say we're all 25-year-olds, like the ones we see playing ball outside. Some of them will get sick and others won't. And fewer of them will get sick as if it was a bunch of, old people in a church. Interior environments with prolonged exposure and not masking and not physical distancing are really dangerous.
Okay, so thank you. That cleared that up really well. Thank you. But I just still have one more question about the nature of a virus. So if it's not technically alive, I mean, when I think of anything that's alive, even down to, maybe a tiny little worm, or there's something in it that wants to replicate, or it has an intention of replication. So when you
Well, I mean, I think it's your definition of what is alive. Let's just say that it's an entity that cannot do its primary function without being inside another cell.
oh, I see. It can't replicate itself.
That's all it's there for.
I see.
Where cells themselves, what's the difference between a bacterium and a virus? The bacterium is got all it needs to reproduce.
I get it. I get it. So it's sort of like what's it called?
A neutered capon.
You know, the thing that the creepers that attach to a tree that can't
Pigs.
really,
Epiphyte.
Yeah, but you see a virus, the difference between viruses and let's say even bacteria, which can come together and form larger things. The cells, you know, like colonies
Yeah.
used on a petri dish. You don't see that with viruses. What viruses will do, they can change the cells so that the cells appear different, but they themselves aren't changed. So they're very limited in what they actually can do as organisms. They are very good at forcing other cells to make new ones. And actually, there are viruses that infect bacteria. They're called bacteriophages. That's where they live, inside bacteria, rather than human cells or animal cells. And in fact, we've used that technology for our advantage. What do I mean by that? Human insulin, I don't know if anybody knows where human insulin comes from. It doesn't come from people. It's a form of insulin that is chemically indistinguishable from insulin that we make ourselves. But how do they make it? They've taught E. coli bacteria.
E. coli. I love it.
And what they've done is they engineered a virus that infects bacteria with the genetic code that produces insulin. And so they then infected the E. coli with these viruses, and the E. coli makes human insulin. And that's how they manufacture, or at least how they started to manufacture human insulin.
fascinating. Thank you. You've really cleared up a lot for me. Thank you very much.
I have a question about high blood pressure, hypertension. It is a risk factor for bad outcomes. It also, I understand, affects something like 2/3 of the population, of the older population. So my first question is wondering how much, how clean the data are on that, because how much it, because so many people have hypertension, is that really a risk factor, or is it the age? And the second question is, one of the most common drugs is an ACE1 inhibitor. Well, actually, the second question is the risk with hypertension per se or uncontrolled hypertension? And the third part of it is, with an ACE1 inhibitor, I've seen arguments back and forth, like lisinopril, of whether it's going to make you more vulnerable, or it's going to protect you. And there seems to be both camps.
Right.
I'd love your opinion.
Well, the answer to your first question is I don't know, because I haven't read the literature that I'm reading, even the stuff that's coming out of China. Remember, some of this stuff has been published by the Chinese because they're the ones that had the largest number of cases early on. So I haven't seen, for example, risk stratification done based on, well, how long have they had high blood pressure? How well has it been controlled? What drugs have they been taking? If somebody's pressure is 200 over 100, are they more susceptible to dying or getting a worse disease? None of that data has been published, at least that I've seen. Now, granted, I am not a researcher. I am following this for a variety of reasons, but it has not been published in the literature that I have seen being flagged. Now, I don't doubt, again, that some of it is going to be coming out necessarily, okay? In other words, Penelope has high blood pressure, which is well controlled. How much more of a risk does she have than someone whose blood pressure is not well controlled? I don't have that information for you. Now, as far as the ACE inhibitors go, it's interesting. It seems that ACE inhibitor ones that you mentioned probably are mildly protective, mildly.
Okay.
They have not definitely shown that they are dangerous. The receptor that they attach to is not exactly the same receptor either, as you know. So I would, another drug which they think might be partially protective, and again, they don't, this is based on epidemiological data, not actual research, is the stuff used to treat hypercholesterolemia, statins.
Oh, right.
And that may be because it modifies the immune responses that are causing these cytokine storms that are so dangerous to patients. So, because one of the things that statins do besides lower your cholesterol level, they actually reduce inflammation within the lining of the blood vessels where the plaques form. And so, and they appear maybe to be helpful. Not to the point where people have recommended starting them on patients. In other words, Mrs. Smith, whose cholesterol is fine, has never been on a statin, gets COVID-19. Are you going to start her on a statin to help her get over the infection? I suspect they're looking at this, but it's not been published, and it may not pan out. It may be one of the 30 drugs that are on that list. I haven't seen the list. By the way, there is a huge amount of international cooperation when it comes to this. Those they have bulletin boards now that when the SARS COVID-19 mutates, the new genetic code is immediately done, and it's posted for other scientists around the world to see. None of this is, that kind of level of research is going on despite our crazy government.
And withdrawal from WHO.
Right, yeah.
It's still.
But it's going on, you know, underneath. And when he's talking about withdrawing from WHO, he may be able to affect what the CDC is doing, because since he is trying to destroy that agency. But it doesn't prevent anybody from communicating with them. Nobody. I mean, he can't force, you know, researcher X not to talk to them or share their stuff on bulletin boards. It's going to be impossible to police too. He just, you know, he wants to punish them for, he's trying to deflect his own, you know how he works. But the point is that it is true that in the beginning, WHO was slightly cousined up with the Chinese because they were afraid of being cut off from information, which they thought they needed to disseminate. And they used, and now he's using that as a mechanism to try to beat them down and blame them for his failings.
Jack, in India, because I talk to my cousins on WhatsApp, a lot of them are, this is just gossip or just idle chatter. They keep saying, because they're so used to not bacteria, but I don't know, waterborne diseases, not to be so not to be so antibacteria there. They think they have an immunity because they're so constantly surrounded by, I don't know, germs. That in short,
some of that's true.
Countries are so need to be a bit more pro-bacteria. Is that even true? Is there a validity to that?
There's no connection between this virus and this disease and a bacterium.
Okay.
Yes, people who get this disease are more susceptible to bacterial infections, and we're seeing that. And there are excessive mortality figures that are probably attributed to that. But this is not caused by a bacterium. This isn't a plot that someone is, I mean, the thing that Barbara sent me was shocking. And actually, I'm glad you did it, Barbara, because I live in a rarefied world of empiricism, and I never even occurs to me that people could believe such shit. And it's useful.
It was sent to me by a friend who made note, please fact check this, because he wasn't buying it.
Well, I
And
mean, even the science behind it, think about what it takes to have an international conspiracy. One of the assertions in this was that WHO was forcing people not to have autopsies and trying to hide the fact that this was really a bacterium, the major mechanism of which was to induce clotting.
and that aspirin worked.
And aspirin would treat this, and coagulants. Now, what they really meant was anticoagulants, but that's not. But I don't remember in all the years of practice ever when a patient passed away and we offered autopsies to the decedent's relatives that I contacted WHO for permission to do this. It makes no sense. That's the first line. So you didn't have to read any more of it because there isn't any possibility that WHO has any effect or any ability to tell people who not to do anything to, because they have no authority on the practice of medicine anywhere. Now, it is true, however, and this is where you say, how do you make a lie that people believe? Well, it should be, what do they say, 90% true and 10% a lie. And therefore, the working aspect of it is, but the fact is there have been people discouraging the performance of autopsies. And the reason is they don't want to use up medical resources to do it. How many COVID cases do you have to autopsy to get the information you need about the natural progression of this disease at that level, unless you're doing research? And there have been places where there's, suggesting that, no, you don't have to autopsy every single case. In the days before, you have to, this is an interesting thing, it's just part of the medical history, and maybe you're not interested. I'm always talking about, well, things were when I was a medical student. When I was a medical student, we used to try to get an autopsy on every patient that died in the hospital, every one of them. And it wasn't necessarily because we thought we had made a mistake or this or that. It was to get more information about the natural history of these diseases. And remember, no CAT scanners, no MRI machines. We had very limited tools to learn about how disease worked and progressed without actually seeing the anatomy. And indeed, I remember going to exploratory laparotomies. We couldn't figure out what was wrong with somebody. We cut them open to look. We don't do that anymore because we have all the machines and all the non-invasive ways of figuring these things out. It's very rarely happens. So things have changed. And now the autopsy rates in most hospitals are 2 or 3%. And it usually revolves around medical legal issues. Someone thinks you killed their mother and they want an autopsy done to make sure that you did, so they can call their lawyer.
I have a practical question.
Yes, sir.
So one of the things that I miss the most under this crisis is the ability to go to the gym and to the pool and to swim. And I remember when I was first, when all this first came out and before they shut everything down, I decided I'm not going there. But one of the things that they talked about was that the chlorine in the pool might help. So I'm assuming that at some point in the not too distant future, they will open up, health clubs again. I'm very hesitant about going at all. So, I mean, I bought a wetsuit, so I'm going to try to swim in the lake, but
Oh my God.
but aside from that.
Actually, it depends on, I think it is safe to swim, but it depends on how they work it. For example, there's an environment where inhaling water could set up a real coughing jack, or people actually get water in their mouth and they spit it out in the pool because that's how you breathe and how you do your things. Yes, if the chlorine is of a level that it kills, because don't forget, it's not just bacteria that they're trying to kill. They're trying to kill hepatitis virus because people excrete hepatitis virus in their stool. It's not that you're pooping into the thing, but the water does lap your nether regions. I don't have to go into the details. But the point is that if you are excreting hepatitis virus and you don't know, you know, who knows who's doing that, they need to have the chlorine level high enough to inactivate that virus if it happens to be lapped around by the water that you're in. So the chlorine levels are certainly, as you well know, much higher in the pool than they would be in your drinking water.
Right.
The issue there is respiratory isolation. How far away are the lanes from one another, and how close are you going to pass by someone else who's doing laps? And my thinking is, if the pool is large enough and they restrict, if I were running the pool, I would say, okay, Ellen, what time? You got an hour. We're not allowing anybody in the pool for more than an hour. We're only allowing 2 or 3 people in the pool at one time. They're going to be 2 or 3 lanes apart. We're going to have you going in an opposite directions. And so you're only going to pass each other maybe once or twice. And what time are we signing you up for? I'm looking at the schedule. We've got 7 p.m. You can come between 7 and 8. And under those circumstances, okay, it may be safe for you to go head to the pool. But are they going to run it that way? I have no idea.
And what about the locker room? What about the other surfaces? What about?
Well, again, how often are they, my belief is it's unlikely that you're going to get it from sitting down on a wooden bench, but how often are they going to be cleaning the locker room? Or why can't you're talking about the YMCA, or you're talking about the pool in the building?
I'm talking about LA Fitness in Evanston.
Oh, okay. So you're going to an outside gym.
Yeah.
Again, how often are they cleaning it? Under what circumstances are the surfaces being cleaned? Could it be possible for you to simply go home in your wet bathing suit? I don't know. How many people are going to be in the locker room?
Mm-hmm.
How close are they going to? You're not going to be wanting to stand against Mr. Schwartz, whose locker is 2 feet away from you. No, I wouldn't do that. An indoor space, again, what's the ventilation like there? How close is, one thing I know I'm never going to do is go into there's another problem I might as well face, if I'm being indelicate, is public bathrooms. Mm-hmm. I mean, exactly, you're in a restaurant and you have to get up and pee. Well, you're not going to, most of them can have 1 or 2 people and the room is tiny. And what kind of ventilation is in there? And yes, you're going to wash your hands, but what about the air? So one person after another is going in there, none of them masked, or if they put their mask on to go into the bathroom, is that really happening? And so that's a closed environment, which is getting more titers of COVID-19 as it's being used. Now, if you can be the first person of the day to use the bathroom, that's fine. I don't know about you, but I find, and again, without getting too much details, if I'm going to be at a dinner for more than 2 hours, I'm going to be in trouble. That's another, so.
And swimming in the
very
lake?
Practical things. I'm sorry.
And swimming in the lake?
Have fun. You're more likely to get sick from E. coli in the lake than you are from COVID-19.
Jack, this is a weird one. When we're able to fly again, do those PPE suits, should that be our attire on an airplane and then we get off and get rid of them?
I certainly would leave the suit in the airplane, and I would wear a mask in that face shield. I love that picture. Not that I would ever get in that airplane. It's too many people in there.
No, I understand.
But I'm just saying, no, leave your suit in. Leave it in there, and take your face shield. And now you have to clean your face shield occasionally. I would use, what you're using to disinfect surfaces. Merle?
Yeah. Okay, I have another mundane question. I'm very seriously considering having my housekeeper return. And I would want her to, take the precautions, mask, gloves, take off her shoes. But what troubles me is that she takes public transportation here, and I don't know the other places she goes in the week.
Right.
And I just can't quite assess the risk.
Well, if you have somewhere to go while she's there, I would recommend it. But where are you going to go? How long does she stay?
Half a day, maybe.
I would be very uncomfortable. In those circumstances. I mean,
Too, but then,
probably nothing is going to happen. Let me just say this to you: if you have a 95 mask, that would be the time to wear it. So that if she, and then stay as far away from her as you can, and have the window open with good ventilation.
oh, that won't be like the breeze batting these little particles around?
Well, depending on, I don't know what the air circulation is like in your place. I do know that if Our Lady comes, I turn off the air conditioner so that there's no recirculation at all during the time she's here. Now, I have to admit to you, we've had our housekeeper here yesterday. However, as you well know, we have a 4-story home. And we were never closer to her than 2 stories. Plus, we all had masks on. And I had shut down the air conditioning system, so there was no internal circulation of air.
Well, what I was thinking was, even if I do go out, if she by any chance is a carrier, isn't it possible that she might leave some cells around that will be live after she leaves?
It's possible, but it's unlikely that you're going to, I mean, again, don't forget, what is she doing? She is, unless she touches it, if she's wearing gloves, I might as well bring up the glove issue. Gloves are like having unwashed hands. They're okay as long as you don't touch your face after they've been contaminated. But don't forget, she is also, what is she doing while she's there? She's using soap and water. She's using detergents. She's using whatever you're using to clean the surfaces. So she's got that on her glove. And that is also disinfecting the glove at the same time. This is why I said to you, you really can carry this contact stuff a little bit overboard. But but as Penelope once said, and I remember that because I agreed with you, there is no zero, unless you are by yourself in your apartment with a closed environment of only your husband or whoever's there who's as reclusive as you are. You have your food delivered, you disinfect what's reasonably to disinfect. There's no zero here.
Oh, clearly.
But if Merle stayed in a back room?
I think if she's away from her, fine. Social
Actually, in the way we usually deal with each other, we're never in the same room. We talk occasionally, but
well, that's another thing. No chit-chatting.
No,
and anybody who's going to go to a barber or a hairdresser, tell them to keep quiet.
I am, by the way, doing that. I will confess, I have appointments now, and we're all wearing masks.
No talking. No, seriously, that's one thing about the guy who cuts Michael and ours. You can't shut him up. So it's like, no talking. I don't want to hear about it. Quiet. Anyway, Alex.
No, actually, it was also about haircuts. My mother-in-law is quite keen on getting her haircut, and she says that both she and the hairdresser will be wearing masks. But
Yeah,
they are in a contained space. I don't know what the air circulation is like.
You just tell her to get out as soon as she can and not talk. They have them not talk, because just breathing, you're going to expel virus, but the mask can be very good at containing that. But once you start doing stuff that increases the volume of the droplets, you're just increasing the risk. So no talking. I love you very much. While I'm in your chair, nothing.
I'm really glad that you brought up the talking piece, because obviously I would think to do the mask, but I didn't realize if you talk when the mask is on.
That's my phone, and I'm going to decline it. Anyway, I know who it is. It was Maria Lands for some reason, Michael. Why don't you call her and ask her what you want?
Maybe she was going to say happy birthday.
That's possible.
The right thing to say.
Anyway, I hope this was helpful to you all.
Because one of the things I'm plotting is
I know
if
what
my
you're-
hairdresser can come here, we go out onto the balcony and he cuts my hair out there.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. Can you
Well,
loan
And
your
also,
balcony out to us?
yeah, I guess
What?
that's a great.
I said,
Matt,
you could loan your balcony out to us.
but no talking, and you know, your neighbors will never see your hair strands as they blow into Lake Michigan.
I have an alternative. We just choose Diane as a role model and we aim to have, you know, I mean, maybe the
If we
next,
had
and
a-
not long ago, I was nearly bald. So this is
Well,
getting long.
The problem
You
with
know?
us, man, is it won't ever
I'll
look
look
like
for
that
that.
unless we wear a wig. Well, maybe Alex, if he has a full head of hair, but the rest of us, no. I was actually thinking of shaving my head.
Richard's
And-
getting to a place where he's going to have to start wearing a ponytail.
Michael will, yeah. I was thinking of shaving my head, and I have to tell you, I mentioned that to my aunt, who's 98, on the Thursday. And in fact, we were supposed to be in Portland, Oregon to celebrate her birthday. And I mentioned it to her, and she said, I absolutely forbid you to do that. So that, but there went that idea.
Jack, I have a just simple question.
Sure.
At some point, even if it's months from now, people will be encouraged to go out wearing a mask, N95 or regular one. This is specifically for me because my husband covers COVID patients. I could remain, if I am at all, asymptomatic. So in reality, should I avoid people?
No, you know, the thing is this, I mean, your husband, you're not going to, it's hard to say at what point he might get infected, but he's probably safe because he's using a lot of PPE.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, you know, that 14-day period is a real thing. And if you're not developing symptoms after all this time, when you say avoid people, what are you talking about? It isn't, again, if you've got a mask on and you've got your social distancing, that's your avoidance. If at a time where these are relaxed, and I don't see an end game here personally, until we actually have a vaccine or somehow you know, it is possible, even though this virus doesn't mutate easily. Maybe we get something good happens and it becomes less infectious. And we don't need to have herd immunity with 70%, but maybe the people who've made the sacrifice who have gotten sick at maybe 20 or 30% will be enough, will be not affecting us. But just remember this, even with herd immunity or with a vaccine, there are always going to be small reservoirs of this virus. And where are they going to hide? They're going to hide in children, or people who are not going to have a high enough immune response to remain well. So I don't think the virus necessarily, unless it has a mutation such that it interferes with its ability to infect us, and who knows, maybe it'll happen. But I think it's going to be the vaccine route. And I do think they're going to develop a vaccine, and I do think they may find drugs which will be able to prevent you from getting sick, and I do think they're going to find antiviral drugs. The real question here is if they come up with an effective vaccine, when I say effective, that really works for 80% of the population, and also if you get this illness, modifies it to a degree where you're not going to die from it, you may have what we consider the regular flu. Is there going to be a financial incentive for drug companies to continue to throw in billions of dollars to find antivirals and spend the 3 to 5 years it's going to take them to develop them? Because it may not.
I just wanted to be able to see someone and give him a hug. So that was it. If I see him there.
Well, you said your husband, you've got someone to hug.
Yes,
That's not a hug. It's like crawling all over me, my children and my husband and somebody else.
Okay,
Well, thank you all.
Jack,
It was great.
how do we thank you?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think we
That
should
was
sing
wonderful.
happy birthday.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's sing
Happy
happy
birthday
birthday to you.
to
Happy
Happy birthday
birthday
to
to
you. By the way, Zoom
you.
doesn't work this way.
Happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday. Happy birthday to you.
Wow.
All right.
We have
next
we have just demonstrated the fact that Zoom does not work this way.
No.
So you
No.
can't actually
little
have a
lag.
choir practice. It doesn't time. Right.
No,
Well,
there's a
there
little
must be a
lag.
way of doing it because I think these commercial artists are actually doing, these things. So they must be using a
But they're
different.
not using Zoom. They're using another very expensive piece of
Yeah, but
software.
they're
Yeah.
doing
tend
it
to
on
click-
Zoom too, but I think there's a special Zoom for music.
No.
Otherwise, the musicians, there's the timing, there's just a little, like a second.
There's a lag.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But people have been recording things separately and then it's edited together.
Oh.
That's how it's
Ah.
done.
Yeah, but I
Otherwise,
heard
it
it.
doesn't work.
I heard a program one night that was live and it was fantastic. But somehow
But
they have the technology to do it.
Yeah, it's a different technology that we've just demonstrated. Wow, this doesn't work. Happy birthday, Jack, and thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Okay,
wonderful.
next week, one more thing. Next week, Mara will be presenting on a trip to Ethiopia. What year was that?
2014.
Okay.
Fun.
And the week after that, Alexander, what's your theme?
I'll be doing a walk through my last exhibition in
Wonderful.
in Gujarat.
Oh, fabulous. And I was thinking the week after that, we should pull from all our favorite books, exhibitions, recipes, and maybe pick individually what was important, what had the best story with it, and just talk. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
So you mean about the recipes that we showed today?
Well, it could be the recipe
book.
or the book or,
Yeah.
Yeah, why we chose what we chose.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good
All
idea.
righty.
Thank you
Great.
so much.
Jack,
Yeah,
next
thank
week.
you.
Good to see everybody.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Happy birthday.
Happy.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.